Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? All right, good to see everyone. Thanks for joining today. I'm going to start off and then hand over to Chief Reyes. I just want to set the tone that obviously we're facing very extreme and challenging times, and violence in a lot of cities across the nation has been increasing pretty significantly, and New Haven is no different than that. We've seen an uptick in particular violent crime across the city. There's been no particular neighborhood that's been hit, but many neighborhoods have been hit pretty hard. And it's, I think that anyone living in the community deserves to feel safe. And our team is working very hard to address that. We take these incidents of violence and crime very, very seriously. I think it's important to just remember about the big picture. And that ultimately we can't meaningfully address crime without addressing the underlying causes that are linked to income inequality. And that stems to issues around adequate funding for larger cities like New Haven to allow us to invest in the social service net that helps support people, our education system, ensuring access to housing, and many other city supports that we're struggling to provide because of financial problems. It also is connected to the fact that our state is very segregated in many ways, and that we must better integrate as a society in order to share in the work that we all need to do to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to thrive. In the meantime, our police department has been working very, very hard to address these many incidents of crime. And having been a resident in New Haven for quite some time, an alder, and now mayor, I've seen multiple sides of this. And I can assure you from the many conversations I've had with the chief and his team that our officers from the highest level to officers that are on the front lines deeply care about the safety of the residents and are working very hard to address every incident that comes up. A lot of times people understandably feel frustrated that some things don't get addressed right away, but there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes. And a lot of times these bringing people to justice takes time. Today, the chief is going to share some positive news in that direction. But I did want to express my appreciation to the chief and his team for caring deeply about the public safety of the city. Chief.
Thank you, Mayor. And I echo your words, and I just want to say thank you to you for the support that you've given the department. I know that the focus has been on public safety and on trying to navigate the challenges of this year. And I want to thank you for your support in that effort. We're here today because we, as the mayor said, want to announce some developments in some cases, particularly related to violence in the city. But I would want to take an opportunity first to acknowledge the presence of the team of people within this department, a representative team that really have helped navigate this year and really are responsible for a lot of the work that's being done. Assistant Chief Renee Dominguez of the Patrol Division is with us. Assistant Chief Herb Sharp of our Administrative Division and our Academy is with us, and Assistant Chief Carl Jacobson. Joining us today as well from the State's Attorney's Office is Inspector Reed Durham. Thank you for your presence. And Sergeant Bertram Etienne. And I'm going to allow them to introduce and to talk a little bit about some of the work that's being done and introduce the folks that are doing that work. But just wanted to point out that Sergeant Rawlingson is with us, Lieutenant Zanelli as well, and his team. And so I just want to say personally a thank you to them. The work that's been done this year, or that's being done this year, doesn't get done without the men and women of this department, both in the Patrol Division and the Investigative Services Division. So I'm grateful to them. As the chief mentioned, as the mayor mentioned, it's been a banner year for the city. For the nation. Certainly, as a city, we've been dealing with an increase in particularly violent crime. It's not something that's endemic to the city of New Haven. What we know and what we see is that this has been true for most of the major cities, all of the major cities in Connecticut, and certainly throughout our nation. Cities are reporting an increase in violent crime. We are going to be doing a press conference in the beginning of the year to really peel back and give you basically a rundown of the numbers for this year as they compare to last year's, and really give you a sense of what this year looked like statistically in the work that was done throughout the year. But for today, what I wanted to report on was that we had some significant developments in three shootings, one that occurred as recently as 3 days ago on December 4th, and then the other two shootings that we have made some arrests on dated back to 2019. I will go in reverse chronological order. Just 3 days ago on December 4th, as you know, officers responded to an incident that occurred at 200 Sergeant Drive. Right around 3:30 a.m., officers, in addition to fire and EMS personnel, responded to multiple 911 calls of a person shot on Sergeant Drive. In the front parking lot, in the front of the gas station at 200 Sergeant, emergency responders found an unresponsive gunshot victim in the driver's seat of a sports utility vehicle. The individual was determined to be a 28-year-old man from the city, Mr. James Batista, of 8/25/93 date of birth. He had sustained a gunshot wound to his head. An ambulance transported him to Yale New Haven Hospital, where he received emergency treatment, and we're happy to report that he did survive his injuries, although he still remains in critical but stable condition at the hospital. I want to commend the work of major crimes detectives and our task force officers, our patrol division, collaboratively working. We're able to identify a suspect in this incident pretty quickly, and within hours, we're able to arrest an individual by the name of Nicholas Osario, last name Osario, with a date of birth of 11/5/1998. This individual is a resident of New Haven. He was involved in gunfire with other individuals in that area. This investigation is ongoing, but we did charge Mr. Osario with criminal attempt to commit first degree, assault in the first degree rather, reckless endangerment in the first degree, unlawful discharge, criminal possession of a firearm and weapon in a motor vehicle. As we said, that investigation is ongoing, and we do anticipate additional arrests in that incident. The other incident I wanted to report on was an incident that occurred on October 7th, 2019. This incident occurred at the Regal Inn at 1605 Whaley Avenue. The motive for this incident was an attempted robbery. New Haven police personnel and fire personnel responded to a report of gunshots in the area of 1605 Whaley Avenue. Short time later, responded to St. Raphael's campus, where an individual, a 35-year-old male, Hector Alvarez, 12985, showed up at the hospital suffering from a gunshot wound. He was transported to Yale New Haven Hospital, but he was able to survive his injuries. Major crimes detectives and forensic detectives were able to conduct an investigation. They have recently made an arrest. There is an arrest warrant for an individual of this city, but we at this time are not going to be releasing his name, as he is still outstanding, and we're looking to execute that warrant and arrest this individual. As soon as we do, we will put that information out. We are actively looking for him and expect to have him in custody very soon. He is being charged with assault in the first degree, criminal possession of a firearm, and criminal use of a firearm by a convicted felon, and unlawful discharge. The third incident that we have secured a warrant for is an incident that occurred also in 2019, June 27th, 2019, at 577 Orchard Street. Officers and EMS personnel responded to that location for a non-fatal gunshot victim. They identified Mr. Jason Provost with a date of birth of 3/4/1992, suffering from gunshot wounds. He was later taken to the hospital and survived his wounds. Again, an investigation that spanned over a year. I want to commend the work of detectives who were able to Detective Makarzinski, who is actually with us today. I want to say a personal thank you to him and his hard work. Was able to secure a warrant for Mr. Ewell Mitchell, date of birth 4/26/1992. He was charged with conspiracy to commit assault in the first degree, criminal possession of a firearm, criminal use of a firearm, and pistol without a permit. We do anticipate additional charges on this investigation, but Mr. Mitchell, who is well known to us, is currently incarcerated and has been charged with these charges. We also want to report that we have secured an arrest warrant for an incident that occurred on Munson Street, a homicide. We are not going to be reporting out the details of that arrest and the individual that we have secured an arrest warrant for, because as we speak, that warrant was signed just hours ago, and we are currently meeting with the family of the victim to report to them. We anticipate that we will be doing a press conference on Wednesday with the family to report on that homicide arrest. In addition to this, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Carl Jacobson. In the beginning of this year, I met with State's Attorney, U.S. Attorney John Durham, to discuss, our concerns about violent crime and to collaborate on working together with our federal and state partners on targeting certain individuals. I want to say a big thank you to him and Mr. David Sundberg, special agent in charge of Mr. Sundberg, for the work that they did in collaboration with us to be able to secure arrest of 5 individuals that are involved in really reporting a lot of the crime going on in the city. I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Chief Carl Jacobson to give you more details about that investigation.
Yeah, so like the chief said, there was a discussion at the beginning of the year with the U.S. Attorney, Mr. Durham, and the State's Attorney, Mr. Griffin, Patrick Griffin, about what we can do further on top of our Project Longevity enforcement efforts to get violence under control. We did have a spike right in January of violence. Then we met again in June after some of the COVID restrictions were taken off, because there was a period of time from March to June, grand juries weren't meeting, which is a big thing for federal enforcement, and other things were going on. And then we began an initiative where we meet weekly and talk about the violence and talk about what targets to go after. And as a result of that, the FBI, Safe Streets, with our task force officers, Alvarado and Grillo, were able to put a case together. And on November 9th, a grand jury returned indictments. And Captain Duff will put this out when we put out, the names and photos, but indicted was Herman Bellamy, 43 of East Haven, with counts of possession with intent to distribute cocaine and heroin. Tyrone Dupree, 24 of Hamden, with counts of possession with intent to distribute heroin and crack. Cornelius Ivy, 34 of New Haven, 2 counts of possession with intent to distribute and 1 count of possession with intent to distribute heroin and cocaine. Shante Davis, 44 of West Haven, 4 counts of possession with intent to distribute cocaine and heroin. And Elijah Agnew, also known as Little Bro, 32 of New Haven, with 3 counts of possession with intent to distribute and distribute of cocaine and heroin. This case was important to us. We were able to do the indictments and move on the individuals who trafficked cocaine in the New Hallville area. It was shortly after a recent homicide in New Hallville. And we thank Mr. Durham and Mr. Griffin for their cooperation and their continued cooperation. We couldn't get this done without them.
And so, thank you, Chief Jacobson. And so I want to point out that these individuals were arrested on federal charges to distribute narcotics, but the reason they were targeted, make no bones about it, these individuals are directly connected to the violence in the city. And so this is a tool that we have, and we work with our federal partners and to identify folks that are driving the violence in our city. And thanks to the work that we did collaboratively, we were able to bring indictments against these individuals and take them off the streets, because they are driving the violence. They're connected to the violence. And just before I I close and open it up to any questions, again, I want to point out that amidst all the challenges this year, our patrol division, our investigative services division has been working collaboratively with the State's Attorney's Office and the federal partners to really address the issues related to crime. It's been quite a challenge this year, and we've seen the spike in violence, but we continue our focus on bringing down violent crime, and we'll continue doing that moving into next year as well.
Any questions from folks? Kyle, go ahead. Tom.
Everyone, I know that, Mr. Mayor, when we talked to you in the spring or early summer, you had mentioned that a lot of the, that you were afraid without having programs for teens to get into, that there could be a spike in crime. Do you all see a connection with young people not having things to do as part of this spike in crime? And are you all looking to offer any more programs? I know in the beginning you mentioned the financial restrictions, but what other ways are we looking at for intervention for young people?
Yeah, I think undoubtedly COVID has made it more difficult to engage young people. And there's a variety of reasons for that. One is obviously that young people are not in school. The second is in particular for those particular high-risk youth. Historically, we would be more directly engaged with them through what was Youth Stat, now is Youth Connect. And the police department would do, for example, call-ins, but that's been more difficult to do given the situation going on. I think that, you know, in the ideal scenarios, we get the cases under control and we can get get most youth back in school. Is going to have the most impact on our ability to engage young people. And Youth Connect continues to do a lot of direct outreach to young people. And that's even going door to door to find youth that have been disengaged. And in addition to what, you know, teachers are doing in their own classrooms to try to engage youth. I don't know if Chief, you have anything to add here on youth engagement.
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on most of it, Mayor. We have seen, we've certainly seen a spike, especially recently, of juvenile-related crimes, especially as it relates to vehicle thefts, stolen vehicles, and robberies. We've had some notable incidents as of late where we've made some arrests of individuals who are going around throughout not just our city, but neighboring cities, other cities in Connecticut, really on crime sprees, stealing cars, and most of them are juveniles. And so it has been an issue, not just for us, but surrounding towns. And we have made some significant arrests involving that. Most recently, I see Sergeant Marshall has joined us. Him and his officers in the Hill just recently made an arrest of juveniles stealing vehicles, in possession of handguns, and you know, really did a good job of mitigating that issue without any serious outcomes. But it has been, especially as of late, a concern. And I think the mayor did a perfect job at really explaining some of the dynamics that we're dealing with.
Yeah, and even things like sports, right? A lot of young people get engaged with sports, but because of COVID, we've had to close down a lot of the options for sports-related activities as well. So, needless to say, it's been pretty difficult for us to find ways to engage our youth. Tom.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chiefs. Chief Reyes, you mentioned a warrant for a Munson Street homicide that you'll likely hold a press conference for next week. But just to confirm, is that a Munson Street homicide that took place this year, or is that a previous year?
No, that is this year. And we should be doing the press conference on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Keep it posted.
And Chief, how has COVID affected the department, especially this most recent surge? Do you have a sense of how many officers are currently off work because of COVID or because they've been exposed to COVID? And then more broadly, how is it affecting the department right now?
Well, I mean, the recent spike has impacted us, just like it's impacted, the broader community. We did have a spike. We did notice a spike. Actually, at one point, we had more officers that had contracted COVID than we had at any point during the height of COVID. So certainly we're impacted. I think Chief Dominguez, we're up to, is it 24 officers that are currently out?
We have 21 who are currently out, 11 of them are positive,
Okay.
with a total of 37 positive since the pandemic started.
So definitely has impacted us. I think, we are, again, really focusing on engaging in all the measures necessary to make sure that we we don't contract a COVID and that we don't spread COVID. Social distancing, wearing masks, we're reinforcing that with our officers. Obviously, they're out there, they're reporting the incidents, it puts them at greater risk. We have implemented our COVID regulations again. We had started to respond to more incidents. We have since the spike, we have gone back to a more modified response with the public and making phone calls whenever we can, having less engagement with the public when we don't have to, except for serious incidents, and taking all the precautions necessary.
Thank you. And Chief Reyes or Assistant Chief Dominguez, could you give us a very quick sense or two, kind of what happens when you find out that an officer has tested positive or has been exposed? Could you give us kind of quick rundown of how you all respond?
Chief Dominguez?
Okay. When an officer tests positive, either because we sent them because they were symptomatic or just getting test results, we do a thorough contact tracing with everyone the officer has come in contact with, and put out, per the CDC guidelines, out on quarantine the officers who have had a significant exposure for the appropriate time from the incident of that they had contact with the positive officer, if that makes sense. So our 21 officers that are currently out are varying days. Several come from the same exposure to the same officer, and they'll return different days depending on when in the 2 weeks prior period they had contact with the officers. We go back 2 weeks from positive. We go backwards 2 weeks, and then we quarantine for 2 weeks from that day.
It's worth noting as well that some of the officers that are quarantined or that tested positive, not all of them were as a result of work exposures. Some of them were from external exposures.
Yeah, I would say about half. Currently, half of our officers out are from at-home family members, most likely, who tested positive, and then half of them are out due to, we could say, they were exposed while at work.
Thank you for that. And then one more question, if I may. Quickly, thank you for letting me have the floor. Chief Reyes, I noticed a number of retirements and resignations from the department listed in the city's weekly HR update today. Could you speak as specifically or generally, or however you'd like, to staffing levels in the department right now and how you're feeling given uptick in crime and also COVID having some officers out?
Yeah, and so the recent retirements we knew of from the beginning of the year, based on a collective bargaining agreement, these individuals put in for retirement from as early as February. And so now in December, the last of the people that had put themselves on the list are retiring. And just notably, we lost two veteran detectives, actually 3 veteran detectives just this month. And so it's a big hit to the department. But we're certainly happy for them. And listen, this is tough. I don't think any number of officers that we could have had would have been enough for 2020. This has been quite a challenging year, and I commend the department. I think the officers and detectives, everyone has really come together. Everybody's wearing multiple hats and really doing everything possible to deliver the highest level of service to our community. And we've weathered quite a storm this year, and so it's tested our resolve. But quite frankly, I don't think there would have been any number of officers that we could have had that would have been enough to satisfy what the need for 2020. But That said, it's certainly been much more difficult with the strength of the department being lower than it normally is. But we're working hard right now. We have officers in the academy, we have cadets in the academy rather, and we're expecting they will graduate in January, with another group of 6 coming from post about a couple months after that, 5 weeks after that. And we're going to be recruiting the first of the year. We're going to be doing a strong recruitment campaign, and I've already gotten the green light to fill the ranks and to do everything possible to fill those positions. So that's what will be done.
Thanks, Tom. Sabina.
This question is for the chief. So we spoke to some families today who had loved ones who were homicide victims in the city throughout the year. They're concerned as they see the uptick in violence and the murders continuing, that their loved ones' cases are going to get lost in the shuffle with your detectives having so many cases to deal with. What can you tell those families who have yet to see their loved ones' cases resolved?
That's a great question, and I certainly appreciate that we too have received those concerns, and we field those calls very regularly, if not daily sometimes. And there is a concern, and one of the things that we try to do is keep the families informed. Our detectives do a great job of communicating with families, keeping them up to date. And at times there is no update, but there's still a connection and there's still a relationship. And we assure them that we're not forgetting about their cases. Listen, there are cases like the Munson Street homicide where we're able to resolve within weeks or months, right? And the reality is, and I worked in the detective bureau for many years and I ran the homicide unit. The reality is that sometimes it takes years before we're able to find resolution for families, and it's difficult. And on Monday, on Wednesday, when we announced the arrest of the Munson Street homicide, invariably, there'll be one family that's relieved and has some closure, but there'll be dozens of families that feel like, what about my child, right? What's happening with my case? And that's what our detectives deal with. And so what I say to them is, we will not forget about their case. We will continue working on their cases. We never forget about the cases. These cases, we've made arrests on cases that are 7 years old, 5 years old, 12 years old. We don't give up on cases. And at any moment, a development can happen on an investigation. And we're always ready and willing to exhaust any lead that comes on any investigation. Our detectives do a great job while they're investigating their current cases. Detectives never forget about their cases. They're asking constantly, hey, listen, do you have any information on this case? When they deal with someone that may have information on a particular homicide. So what I say to those families is that don't give up, because we're not giving up, and we will continue to work on those cases. We don't forget about them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
I've got a question, Chief Reyes.
Sir.
Hey,
Justin. At a recent Westville CMT, Lieutenant Rosa was asked about the drop in traffic stops, down like 30 or 35% this year. And his comment was twofold. One, that the department didn't have enough resources. And secondly, that some officers were concerned about the new state laws and the liability that the officers assume. Could you speak to that?
Well, what I will tell you is that that our officers are working, and they're working hard, and we see that day in and day out. I would say that the reduction in traffic stops is much more a byproduct of the overwhelming challenges of this year, right? And there've been so many challenges, whether it's been the pandemic, whether it's been the social unrest from the incident in Minnesota, and all the challenges that we faced following that. Are officers thinking about the accountability bill? Sure they are. Are officers concerned about the anti-police sentiment? Of course they are. But our officers are also professionals. We have constant communication with our officers. Our officers are committed to their role. Our officers are committed to their oath. And We engage our officers, we talk to them about it. They are concerned about that, of course they are. But they're also consummate professionals and they're continuing to do the job. We see that day in and day out. Unfortunately, again, because of the challenges of this year, there are many things that there's a lot of enforcement. There's a lot of things that we have not been able to do to the degree that we'd like to do it. And traffic has been one of them, but we have been focused on traffic. We started off the year, the first 3 months of the year, with the highest traffic enforcement numbers that we've had in recent years. But then we got derailed with COVID, right? And so I would say to you that although I understand the lieutenant's sentiment, and he's certainly speaking from the heart and for concern for his officers, but I would tell you that much more of that has a lot to do with the byproduct of all the challenges that we've had, and also, yes, some of the shortages and us having to be selective and strategic about our placement of our resources. But all of this, it's not one thing, Mr. Sir Filippi. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of issues that lead to the types of things that are being done or not done out there. But I can assure you that we're open for business and our officers are out there working. They're taking enforcement, and we're solving crime.
If I could just add, Chief, that as the Chief said, very early on in this year, January, February, the Chief and I had conversations about traffic enforcement being a priority because, frankly, there's a lot of lives, too many lives lost in New Haven because of dangerous driving. And during the initial phases of COVID, we were doing very, very little traffic enforcement. So, throughout the year, that really dropped our average. But the Chief and I are constantly talking about balancing an overtime budget with what additional resources we can bring in to address the drag racing, the dirt bike riding. I mean, there's been drag racing issues throughout the summer. There's been some recently in Route 80. We're constantly talking about how we balance paying for those additional resources, but ensuring that we're able to to stay as close as we can to our budget. And it's a real strain. It's a very difficult, it's a difficult time because we have without a doubt, an increase in activity in all different areas, and at the same time, serious constraints around our budget.
And Mayor Elicker, could you speak to the staffing studies that have been long talked about so that we can understand, how many people we need in the police department so that we don't run into this issue?
Yeah, the Chief and I have talked some about the idea of doing a deployment study. And to be honest, I kind of go back and forth on it. The idea that we would have an outside, and I'll speak frankly, and the Chief, I don't know, you may disagree with me, but the idea that we have an outside company come in and tell us how many officers we need when we don't have the luxury of choosing how many officers we can have. I anticipate that undoubtedly we pay someone a lot of money to come in and tell us we need a lot more officers to deliver on the real community policing that our community, from what I hear by and large across the city, would like. Officers that are walking the beat, bicycle officers, officers that are showing up at events to meet community members. We just don't have the number of officers to do that right now. And even if we would like to, we can't get to that number. And so in some ways, I'm reluctant to spend what the going rate is pretty significant for a deployment study that will tell us something that we already know. At the same time, I know the Chief internally with his team has done a good amount of work on analyzing what's an appropriate level of officers to deploy across shifts, because as you know, different shifts require different number of officers because there's calls that come in more frequently during certain shifts than others. But frankly, I'm reluctant to spend a bunch of money for a deployment study that's going to tell us we need a lot more officers that we can't afford. Chief, I don't know if you have anything to add here.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think the other thing too is that this has been an anomaly of a year, right? And so I think too we need to right now we're working on filling the ranks. We're budgeted for 406 officers. That we're working on doing that. The issue isn't whether or not we hire more officers. Right now, we are working on doing that. And so the efforts are to fill the ranks, and we will be doing that. What you have to remember, in recent years, a collective bargain, there was a perfect storm. We went without a contract for 3 years. We lost within a 2-year period that preceded the collective bargaining agreement. We lost a ton of officers. In 1 year, we lost 59 officers, right, due to the uncertainty of the collective bargaining agreement. Add to that the difficulties of this year, right? And so this is an issue not just on how many officers we choose to have. At this point, it's just us. We solidified the collective bargaining agreement. We have a solid contract for our officers. And now, right now, it's supporting our officers and filling the ranks. That's what the priority is. That's going to take time. You can lose 59 officers in one fell swoop. It's very difficult to make that up as quickly as you lose them. So we're working on that. And our focus next year, and this year derailed that, it will be filling the ranks. And I think once you see that, you will start seeing, then it'll give us a better picture from a baseline perspective of what we're achieving with the number of officers we have. And then depending on what the city wants and depending what our community wants, how many more officers, if any, we should be putting in the department. But right now, it's about filling the number we have. We haven't been able to do that.
And I don't want to close the door entirely on a deployment study. I just haven't seen the value in it given our limited resources yet, but I'm certainly open to the conversation.
I mean, from a public resident civilian perspective, there's certain calls that maybe aren't best, answered by a police officer. Routine noise complaint. If you have a complaint about somebody parking on their front lawn, that needs to go to the police department. So I think a staffing study would be more than just deployment per se, and it should also involve the use of technology. Waterbury has a program where people can volunteer to sign up and share their home cameras with the police department. If the police department has a crime in a certain neighborhood, then they could reach out to that list and say, okay, for example, Mr. Sir Filippi has a camera that points out to Alden Avenue. Let's go speak to him, as opposed to walking around, knocking on doors, maybe not finding people home. So
I will say you have a strong point, and we are working on that. We're working on how we can better use technology to maybe do some expedited calls, see what calls qualify for a non-officer response, where people can do the report from the computer or generate a case number from a computer. That's stuff that we are working on doing. Again, this year sort of sidetracked a lot of our priorities, but that I agree with you. I think it's about analyzing how we can better use our resources, and we have been looking at how we can expedite. One thing that this year taught us was that we could definitely streamline police services, and we've been forced to do that because of COVID. But I think we will continue adopting some of those measures moving forward, even beyond COVID, because I think it's just more efficient.
thank you.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to the technology with like the cameras, we use the Ring neighborhood app, and you don't need to have Ring. It's a free app for anybody who wants to upload to that as crime in their area. We monitor it, we're part of that. And we also have the ability to push out to people if there's a crime that happens at 1 Union Avenue. We can push out anybody willing to, it's like a virtual neighborhood canvas. So we do use that. We do have multiple officers trained. So that is a tool we are trying to use everything at our service and available to us, especially with as many people as have personal cameras.
Yeah, Dennis, I don't want to take away from your point that there could be an outside party that also gives additional suggestions of things that we might not have thought about. I've heard an estimate of like $250,000 for a deployment study, and we're open to those ideas. I just struggle with being able to pay that amount right now for something that's recommendations that are uncertain to lead to the kind of savings that we need. Any other questions from folks? All right. Well, it's good to see everyone. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Take care.